Hello, everybody. I am Kedon with Kinetic Catholic Ministries. You might be wondering where we're at with Kinetic, with the podcast, what we're doing. We're going to answer all of that at the end of this video. For now, what we are going to do is dive right into it. There have been a lot of questions that have come up recently regarding just war theory in light of Pope Leo's comments calling just war theory outdated. We are going to dive into whether this is legitimate, what Pope Leo is doing, what he means when he says that, how we as Catholics ought to respond. My goal is to do this in one take because I think that's just more true, to you guys, more authentic with you all when we're looking at this together. I have a lot of notes pulled up in front of me, a lot of different sources, and done a lot of research, and so it might take me a sec to bounce around. It's also important to note that I am doing research and conveying that to you all. I have a degree in theology that does not make me a genius, and so I am not speaking as some specialist, nor do I pretend to. But let's get right to the core of the issue. Pope Leo XIV said in Magnifica Humanitas, his new papal encyclical, which was released on May 25th. It is awesome. I highly recommend it. In paragraph 192, he has a paragraph on just war theory. I'm going to skip to the end of the paragraph. I'm just going to read his words directly rather than trying to tell you what he says. He says, quote, "Today, more than ever, without prejudice to the right to self-defense in the strictest sense, it is important to reaffirm that the just war theory, which has all too often been used to justify any kind of war, is now outdated. Humanity possesses far more effective and capable tools for promoting human life and resolving conflicts, such as dialogue, diplomacy, and forgiveness. The use of force, violence, and weapons reflects a relational poverty that always has disastrous consequences for civilian populations." Just to be clear with you all, when he says reaffirm, the citation that the Vatican website uses takes you to an encyclical by Pope Francis on the 3rd of October 2020 when he talked about how people try to use just war theory to justify every kind of war. I'm going to go through with talking about what the Pope has said in addition to the encyclical letter, and then we're going to look at the history of just war theory, what just war theory really means, and then we're going to merge the two. Okay, so the Pope says this, Catholic teaching says this. Is it different? Is it not? No, it's not different, but we'll get there. So he has gone even farther than that. He sat on a plane to Spain 2 days ago from when this is filmed, on June 6th. When asked about the war in Iran, he said there is no just war there. And my favorite of his was in a homily in St. Peter's Square on March 29th. So he's been saying this. He's just really doubling down. He said, quote, "This is our God, Jesus, King of Peace, who rejects war, whom no one can use to justify war. He does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but rejects them, saying, 'Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood.'" That last line is from Isaiah 1:15. So he's quoting scripture. Isaiah 1:15 says, "Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood." So, number one, a lot of people think that he is specifically targeting America, and I think America sure can be included in the umbrella, but what we have to remember is that even though the Pope is American, and for us as Americans, our world and our media is America, there are many conflicts and wars going on throughout the world. And so the Pope's world is not America. The Pope's world is the world. And so he's speaking internationally. It applies to America, absolutely, but he is not just specifically targeting America. He's been asked directly about the Iran war, and he has condemned it. So he does condemn that military action. But the accusation that him coming out against war is just about America or Trump is absurd. J.D. Vance, the vice president, who I typically don't get really in the weeds and name drop on this show, but these are public people, so we're going to talk about it publicly. J.D. Vance, the vice president, said was against this when the Pope said that you can't justify war. He told the Pope to be careful on theology, which is pretty crazy. And J.D. Vance is a Catholic, so that's a pretty absurd thing to say because the Pope very clearly, as a theologian, an Augustinian, a canon lawyer, knows what he's talking about on theology better than any of us. And he also has the most prayers being said for him of everybody in the world, so he gets an overabundance of grace. I talked about the flight to Madrid. I talked about the vigil at St. Peter's. So yeah, those are the things I'm going to focus on for Pope Leo's comments. Okay, so now we're going to shift to, okay, well, what is just war theory? Like, what does that say? And then we're going to look at merging the two and how exactly that fits in. And again, this is just an overview. So just war theory is not something that was like just invented in the catechism recently, right? Just war theory has a long tradition in the Catholic Church. And it's important to note that doctrine in the church does not change. It cannot change. Doctrine develops. And so that is a key distinction here, because the war that the church fathers were seeing is fundamentally different than the wars that we're seeing today. But we'll get into that. So St. Augustine was a big like foundational thinker for this in the city of God. And it's important to note that Pope Leo is a self-proclaimed son of Augustine. And so he knows what's up. So this is me like super briefly examining it, because if we were to go into the weeds on every church father that has said anything about war, we would be here all day. But St. Augustine emphasizes three conditions. So there has to be a just cause. So defending the earthly peace necessary for the church's mission. There was a lot of persecution of the church going on. There has to be a just cause. There has to be proper authority, so only legitimate rulers can declare war. And there has to be right intention. So it has to be out of love of neighbor, not hatred, vengeance, or glory. Augustine did not see war as like something to like get hype about. He saw it as a tragic necessity, right? Never a good in and of itself. And so he drew on the Old Testament, where we see God approve of wars, which we'll get into later. And so, yeah, Augustine dives into, okay, these are the criteria for what can cause a just war. You shouldn't just wage war. It's a tragic necessity where sometimes it's necessary out of self-defense. That continued to get kind of progressed. Church fathers, St. Isidore of Seville talked about the just war theory. Bernard of Clairvaux talked about it. He had some controversial comments because he was really in the height of the Crusades. And so he developed the idea of the Holy War, which was used to justify a lot of the Crusades, which if we were going to get into the weeds of the Crusades again, we'd be here all day. St. Thomas Aquinas was the next kind of big guy to come in and clear a lot of stuff up. So St. Thomas Aquinas, 13th century, obviously wrote about everything that you could think of theology. Aquinas has an answer. Aquinas wasn't always correct with everything, such as the Immaculate Conception, but Aquinas is a goat, and so we are going to see what he has to say. He kind of took Augustine's three conditions for just war. He reiterated / redid them in a Summa Theologiae. Again, it has to be a declaration by legitimate public authority. It has to be a just cause. And it has to be for right intention. So again, advancement of the good. He originally included like rectifying wrongs. It was later narrowed to self-defense, like the just cause being self-defense. So Aquinas was writing in the era of the Crusades. It was part of a correction on kind of a lot of the enthusiasm that came behind the Holy War. And he said, no, here are the specific criteria that we need to understand. So this was 13th century. And it's important to understand, number one, the means of negotiation in the 13th century, right? You did not have the ability to pick up a phone and talk to somebody. In addition, there were a lot of, like, if someone was being attacked, if someone was being invaded, a village, whatever it might be, what were they supposed to do? What was just? And so for that just cause, declaration by legitimate public authority, it was a just cause of self-defense, and it was a right intention, so avoiding evil, advancing the good, keeping your people alive, not for hatred, revenge, or glory, which is important, then okay, it was a just cause. Cool, so we have the kind of theological framework for just war theory. You have these three criteria, and you did have, so the 20th century obviously brought about a lot of change in how war is waged. The Industrial Revolution, just how weapons were made, the atomic bomb, World War II, a lot of stuff was going on here. So it's important to note, Pope Leo XIV is actually not the first pope to call just war theory outdated. Pius XII, in the height of the World War II era, said, quote, "The theory of war as an apt and proportionate means of solving international conflicts is now out of date." And so he used the term out of date. That was Pius XII. And so we've had this going on for World War II. So the Second Vatican Council came in. Gaudium et Spes talked about the right to self-defense, condemned total war and weapons of mass destruction, obviously. John Paul II opposed the 2003 war in Iraq. Pope Francis questioned, he didn't question, but he looked more deeply into the just war criteria in modern conflicts. He was against development of weapons of mass destruction, of using just war theory to justify war. Okay. Second Vatican Council, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we're going to talk about the Catechism of the Catholic Church because this is the current framework for just war theory. And so I'm going to read directly from the Catechism and just give you all, this is, I really briefly, that was a very brief historical, and I did not get everything. That was a very, very brief historical look at the theological kind of foundation for just war theory. And in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 2309, I'm going to read to you the conditions for military action. The strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force require rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. At one and the same time, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. So that's number one. Number two, all other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. That's number two. Number three, there must be serious prospects of success. That's number three. Number four, the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. The evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good. Okay, so the point of the Catechism of the Catholic Church giving its outline on just war theory was not, all right, we're just going to legitimize this and put out just war theory out there. You can wage war. It was, all right, what it takes to be able to wage a war, the stakes for that actually have to increase. It's like, okay, we got to make this harder to get to, right? We got to make it harder to achieve war. A lot of people like to use scripture, including J.D. Vance, likes to use scripture to say, oh, we can wage war. And you have things and numbers. God commands Moses to wage war against the Midianites. You have a bunch of Deuteronomy talks about the laws for conducting holy war. Ecclesiastes 3, there's a time for war and a time for peace. David defeating Goliath is one that a lot of people use, using violence for a good. And so there are a lot of there are a lot of nuances within the Old Testament. And it's important to understand that the God of the Old Testament is the one and the same God, right, who we serve now. And so specific conditions and specific things that were true thousands of years ago and in the Old Testament look very different today. Just like Aquinas, the Old Testament and the war of the Midianites and the Gideonites and all that, it wasn't, it was Gideon and the Midianites. It wasn't like what it is today. Not even comparable. Plus, Jesus comes and gives us a new covenant and a new chosen people. In Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Matthew 5:39, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek. Matthew 5:44, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Matthew 26:52, all who take the sword will perish by the sword. That's Jesus speaking to Peter. I'm not sure what translation this is. This might not be a Catholic translation, but you're getting the gist of it regardless. Romans 12:21, overcome evil with good. That is not in any way contradictory to specific and contextualized situations that existed in the Old Testament. Because the Old Testament is also not always for war. Isaiah 1:15, Pope Leo quoted it, right? Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. God rejects violence in that instance, right? Hosea 1:7, I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow, sword, or battle. And so it's important to understand the Bible is not just like a big war book. We saw specific and contextualized permission for military action, right, from the Lord, commandments of the Lord, the will of the Lord. The will of the Lord does not change, but the will of the Lord is his will. And so we ought to follow that. And the will of the Lord is made clear throughout Scripture that he is against war, right? And that there are situations of justifiable, legitimate defense by military force. But those conditions cannot be met today. So 2309, I'm going to go back to this. We've talked about Scripture. I'm going to go back to 2309. The very last line of that fourth condition, the power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. Guys, there exist today things that did not exist when the Catechism of the Catholic Church came out, right? Like the battlefield is no longer confined to a field. What we're seeing, and we're seeing it in the Iran war, we're seeing it in wars throughout the world, is hospitals, schools, apartments building, power grids, water systems, food supplies. They're routinely brought into this war. People are starved. Girls' school is blown up. Like whatever, like you didn't have any of that back in the day. You had violent attacks, but you didn't have the ability to do a drone strike, to do an AI drone strike, to come in without a person and just blow something up. Pope Leo goes into this in his encyclical, talking about how like it is evil. He talks about AI. Also, okay, this is a little side tangent. This is an encyclical about the human person that talks about AI. This is not an AI encyclical. Anyway, he talks about AI in this. Now, like even removing the humanity from it is even more destructive, is even more violent. I don't know his exact words. I don't have it written down, but so that's important to understand. Leo is arguing that modern war, like the conditions in 2309 just can't be met, and they're not met in modern war. Like the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. Like the reality is, and Pope Leo brings this up, nowadays you have the ability for community and forgiveness and discussion more than you ever have. You have that justification, right? And so when Pope Leo says war is never justifiable, he is talking about the way in which war is waged today, because you can't justify it. Dr. Mark Miravalli, a top Mariologist and a professor at Ave Maria University and Franciscan University, has this quote where he says, "We follow the man in white over the man in the White House at all times." Pope Leo, as a Catholic American, Pope Leo is our leader. He is our leader. Jesus Christ, obviously, is the ultimate leader. Pope Leo is the vicar of Christ, the successor of St. Peter here on earth, and is to guide us here on earth with the affairs of the earth. And so, very clearly, the Catechism of the Catholic Church leaves open reassessment because of what modern means of war can accomplish. And Pope Leo is coming and reaffirming something that, by the way, was not just said by him. He's coming and reaffirming what Pope after Pope after Pope has said, which is, hey, the wars of Augustine and Aquinas are not the wars of today. They are fundamentally different. And for that reason, you cannot wage a war and stamp just war theory on it and then call it a day. That's not how it works. Pope Leo is not contradicting church teaching. Pope Leo has not said just war theory has never been correct. Just war theory has never worked. Pope Leo is saying now it's outdated. Now we're living in a different world. We're living in a fundamentally different world. There are genocides going on in the world, and people like to slap just war theory on it and call it a day. That's not Christian. I think that Pope Leo is doing a lot well for the American church, just in the fact that he speaks our language. He knows how American media likes to twist things. He's articulate. He's direct. And at the same time, he is not hyper-focused on the politics of America, right? Like, he has a church to run and a world to look after. And so he travels internationally all the time, and he's looking at every international issue. And so what he is not saying is, oh my gosh, America is the worst for this, and I'm going to target America. What he's saying is any nation that is waging a war is not morally justified, and he's correct in that. And the reality is the magisterium of the Catholic Church is responsible for upholding and defending the doctrine of the Catholic Church. And the church is in a dialogue with the world. That does not mean that the church is the world, that the church agrees with the world. It means that the church is in dialogue with the world. That's what a lot of Vatican II was trying to do, was to say, okay, we have this progressing world. We have the church. This is not to say that the traditions of the church change, that anything of the church changes, but it means that we dialogue with the world and we guide the world into the church. We stretch out our arms so that the people on the edges, the people outside of the church, may come into the fold of the church. Not that we change our teachings for them, but that we guide them to the church. In order to guide someone to the church, you have to talk to them. So then the reality became, okay, we dialogue with the world. And the church, dialoguing with the world, looks at how the world changes and how the world is rapidly changing. Right now, the change in the political climate, the change in artificial intelligence, everything that's going on in the world, it's changing. And so the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, is responsible for guiding us as faithful Catholics through the midst of this change. And his argument is that war cannot be waged anymore. The world has changed. It is a different world that we are living in. That doctrine has developed. The doctrine isn't wrong. It's a correct doctrine for the time in which it was established. But the doctrine has changed now. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church makes it very clear that that is possible. Sorry, I'm going to correct myself. The doctrine has developed now. The doctrine has not changed. The doctrine has developed because modern means of waging war have developed. And it is very easy to starve innocent children now. It is very easy to blow up civilians. It is very easy to use AI to commit all sorts of atrocities. And all of those things are happening now. And so, yep, now you can't wage war. And that is just the truth of it. And we as Catholics ought to seek peace and agree with that. So the Pope on a plane saying, yeah, just war theory is outdated, saying in Iran there is no just war there, saying in his encyclical, that just war theory is now outdated, is just correct. And he, as Pope, with the graces that he has, knows more than me, knows more than you, knows more than J.D. Vance, and knows more than American political figures and American media will, including about theology. And so the Pope does not have to be careful. The Pope is the Pope. He, maybe you could consider it radical. Another way to say it is it's just correct. And it's an accurate display of what the state of the world that we are in now. So thank you guys so much for watching. Yeah, we started the podcast Scripture Chat to focus largely on Scripture, and we are going to. There are just sometimes things that go on in the church and the world that I want to talk about, and so we're going to talk about it. The goal is to be significantly more active with content creation, along with kinetic shifting our evangelization, our in-person evangelization focus. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, which is why the content creation might be more sparse, but that does not mean that work behind the scenes is not happening, right? So please share this channel video with your friends and family. If you're listening, share this podcast with your friends and family. Kinetic Catholic on YouTube, Scripture Chat Podcast with Kedon Gumerson on podcasts, and we'll see you all next time. God bless.